Gareth Furby reporting there. Now then, still to come on tonight's show.
Imagine watching one of those old Wild West films where just before went into the town and cleaned it up. That's exactly what the ASCAF was all about.
I think the most action was when if the mods got too close on their scooters. I heard they did put one in the canal, not the guy, the scooter.
Next month marks the 50th anniversary of the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, sparking fresh interest in both the life and death of this remarkable man. Well, Inside Out has been given exclusive access to secret police files that shed new light on JFK's last visit to England just weeks before he was gunned down in Dallas. Glenn Campbell has the story.
President Jack Kennedy is an hour late arriving at Gatwick Airport.
June 1963, and the world was a precarious place. It was the height of the Cold War, the USA and Soviet Union facing one another in a nuclear arms race. And it was in this tense atmosphere that President John F. Kennedy flew into Gatwick for talks at Prime Minister Harold Macmillan's country estate, Birch Grove, just outside East Grinstead in Sussex.
The Sussex Summit is almost like an Indian summer. Here is John F. Kennedy, unknown to him, of course, but his last visit to Britain, to Europe, he's going to be assassinated a few months later.
Former Prime Minister Gordon Brown's admiration for JFK's political legacy resulted in him becoming a close friend of the Kennedy family.
I think this is a major period of his life because he's given this speech in Berlin, which many people remember as one of the significant events of the Cold War, defying the Soviet Union. He goes to Ireland, and then he comes to see his old friend Harold Macmillan.
With the help of Brighton historian Paul Elgood, we found the original police files detailing JFK's visit to Sussex in the summer of 1963.
There were 3 jets before you even start. There were 2 American helicopters. There were 2 presidential cars alone, 100 members of the press. Brighton's 2 largest hotels were completely booked out. Every hotel within Sussex seemed to have been booked up. It was absolutely enormous.
News JFK was attending Mass in the tiny Sussex village brought out hundreds of local onlookers.
The vehicle they used was the same vehicle that Kennedy was later in on November the 22nd, 1963 in Dallas.
Now, half a century on, we've located someone who was behind those closed doors at Birch Grove.
I was 20. My grandfather and I were close. Most Sundays we'd go for a long walk through the woods together, and he would discuss politics. So I was fully aware, and I had been through the Cuban Missile Crisis with my grandfather.
The Earl of Stockton, Harold Macmillan's grandson, lived at Birch Grove and witnessed all the comings and goings of the Sussex Summit of 1963.
When he told us that Jack was coming, I was terribly pleased because I'd met him 3 times before. So this visit was to be both a planning session and a celebration.
You've got to remember that these times politicians didn't meet as they do now in summits like the G8 and G20. They have to steal this time from other things because there are no formal summits that they're going to be at unless they create these events themselves. And the fact it's in the house of Harold Macmillan shows that there is a very personal dimension to this.
Wherever President Kennedy went, he was surrounded by a security bubble. In charge of the Secret Service operation for the Sussex Summit was this man. This photo shows him with Jackie Kennedy on a trip to India. His name is David Grant. But could we trace Mr. Grant 50 years on? Luck, it seems, was on our side. You see, we've managed to find out that former Secret Service agent David Grant is still very much alive and living just outside Washington, D.C.
One of the things I remember about him was his humility. He was not impressed with himself, really. He was impressed a lot by people around him. He was a heck of a guy.
So what was your role in setting up the Sussex Summit of 1963?
I was assigned to go there and represent the Secret Service and the President of the White House of the United States to do a preliminary advance work for the President's visit to Birch Grove House in a meeting with Prime Minister Macmillan. I remember Brighton, of course, where we stayed, and I remember Birch Grove. Very good memories.
He shook hands with us, and he said, I guess I'll be seeing you all in Washington soon. You know. And I think almost his last words to Harold were, we must do this again, and soon.
But, unknown to both men, the Sussex Summit was to be the last time they would meet.
2 or 3 months later, Macmillan is leaving office. After that, Kennedy is assassinated. It is Kennedy's last visit to Europe and his last visit to Britain.
At 12:30 p.m. on November the 22nd, 1963, 3 gunshots ring out from a 6th floor window of a school book depository overlooking the presidential motorcade. First reports are confusing.
A message came over the portable radio equipment that I had that he had been hit, not shot, hit.
Within seconds, the presidential limousine is accelerating away to the nearest hospital.
I went to the Dallas hospital, and Mrs. Kennedy obviously was very upset, but yeah, that's when I first found out he had been mortally wounded.
I think even although I was only 12 at the time, I can remember vividly being in a room with my mother. My father was out, my brothers were out, and then the television broadcast the news of the shooting, and then appeared to go back to normal programs. And then the news came of the death, and you were so aware, and I remember thinking at the time this was a blow against democracy. It was a shooting that would actually change the way people saw the world.
Just as he had been in charge of the advanced security for the Sussex Summit, Secret Service agent David Grant was the one who had also conducted the advance recce for Dallas. On that fateful morning in Dallas, in November '63, why didn't you have the bubble top on the car?
Exposure. The president's staff wanted it all for exposure. You can't argue with him unless you've got a good argument.
Events unfolded swiftly. While David can be seen here loading the president's body onto a flight to Washington, across town his killer, Lee Harvey Oswald, had fled the book depository, taking refuge in a cinema. Recognised by a local police officer, Oswald shot him dead, tried to escape, but was overpowered and arrested. David caught up with Lee Harvey Oswald at Dallas Police Headquarters.
Arrogant, sneer on his face, as far as whether he admitted anything or said anything in my presence. He was asked, why did you shoot the president? Point blank, and he just shook his head.
Said nothing?
Said nothing.
Back in Sussex at Birch Grove, when told of Kennedy's death, Harold Macmillan, who had just resigned due to ill health, made this entry in his diary. Alas, I was never to see my friend again. Before those leaves had turned and fallen, he was snatched by an assassin's bullet.